The man who will start a world war goes by many names: Lucifer, Mephistopheles, Beelzebub. He has corrupted souls, waited for millennia. Now, Satan's time has finally come, and his army of the damned is being assembled. Winner takes all. For thousands of years, prophets around the world have predicted the end of days. More than one suggests the apocalypse is fast approaching. We call this theoretical convergence between doomsday prophecies and today's events the Nostradamus effect. Does the devil really exist? More than 70% of all Americans believe that he does, and 1/3 of them fear his power will ultimately consume the world. Biblical prophecies predict that Satan will seize power in what is known as the end times. The ancient texts describe how he will amass an army of evil whose sole purpose is to destroy humankind. These prophecies suggest Satan will seduce millions into following him and ultimately bring about the end of the world. Some say that today's unrest is a sign that Satan's army has begun to assemble.
Rising violence, not just between nations, but within societies all over the world, is one of the greatest signs, perhaps the greatest, that we're at the very end of the age, and it will grow much worse.
The scripture says the whole world lies in the lap of the evil one.
Does Satan actually exist? Is he possibly orchestrating our demise? Do other ancient cultures suggest similar evil figures, tempting us to commit wrongful acts? And could Satan, in one of his many guises, assemble an army of lost souls at the biblical Armageddon, a place where the world as we know it ends in annihilation? We will neither refute nor endorse these theories, merely present the evidence.
Satan is the father of lies. He is the one who is ultimately bringing all these conditions of the world around that affect men as they do.
Satan appears in early Judaic texts as an agent of God whose sole purpose is to tempt mankind into sin. But many Christians believe Satan is a fallen angel who was once loyal to God, and in the ultimate act of vengeance is now conspiring to overthrow his kingdom.
Here's God occupying the top spot in the cosmos, and Satan doesn't like that. He can't stand it. His pride won't let him accept that. So arrogance and pride, those are the hallmarks of Satan throughout the ages.
In the book of Revelation, Satan appears during the time of tribulation, a 7-year period characterized by extreme disasters. At the end of this biblical time period, Satan returns to earth to recruit corrupt souls for an army that will confront God. This Revelation prophecy establishes the ultimate battle that will occur between good and evil.
Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time.
This form of writing we call apocalyptic. It comes from the word for revelation, apocalypse. This apocalyptic writing had certain characteristics that were common all across apocalyptic examples of writing. For example, virtually all of them feature some kind of great cataclysm, some kind of great battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil.
But is Revelation's depiction of Satan's prophecy meant to be taken literally? And how does this belief compare to other religions? An examination of early civilizations reveals that certain cultures believe in a supernatural evil being.
If you go back to the earliest cave paintings, several thousand years before Christ, and you look at those, there will be animal-like, half-man, half-beast figures.
A powerful god, capable of death and destruction, emerges from the texts of ancient Egypt.
Ancient Egyptians had a kind of devil-like figure that at the end of your life you would appear before the gods and they would weigh your life. The goodness in your life had to outweigh a feather. And if it didn't, you were cast off into some form of darkness.
And what of Islam? Does this global faith, 1.5 billion strong, have a satanic figure that orchestrates the end of days?
Satan in the Islamic tradition is known as Iblis. And Iblis is different than the devil in Christianity in that he is not a fallen angel. He is a separate type of creation known as a demon spirit or a jinn.
According to the Quran, Islam's holiest text, this demonic spirit corrupts humanity and brings down God's wrath upon the world.
There are signs that the Day of Judgment will come. There'll be all kinds of catastrophes.
According to traditional Islamic beliefs, the end of the world will be preceded by two distinct catastrophes, a red death and a white death.
Before the Qiyams rise, two deaths will occur, one death red and the other white. These will kill 5 out of every 7 persons. The red death will occur by means of killing, and the white through epidemics.
Interpreters believe that these two forms of death correspond with 2 of Revelation's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In Revelation, the Red Rider brings death by war, the Pale Rider by sickness.
There's some indication that the end of time will be near when there is mass devastation and famine and hunger and environmental degradation and conflict and warfare.
But does Islam, like other religions, feature an actual satanic figure? And does this figure also lure humanity to destruction in a final battle? According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad told his companions,
He will claim to be God and try to create doubts in your minds. Have a firm belief. The one-eyed creature cannot be your Lord. He will claim to have come with the gifts of paradise and an arsenal of hell.
There will be a great deceiver, the DIAZ, who will appear and lead people astray and will wreak havoc on the environment and on civilization and will destroy and kill many people.
In the midst of this suffering, the Islamic prophecy suggests a Redeemer called the Mahdi will return alongside Jesus Christ.
The Islamic view of the end of the world is very similar to that of the Christian view. Muslims believe that Jesus will come back at the end of time.
According to Islamic tradition, Jesus and the Mahdi will join forces and lead their chosen ones into battle against the one-eyed Dajjal and the Sufyani, a bloodthirsty tyrant.
There'll be a day of judgment and people will be sent to heaven or hell depending on how they conducted themselves in this world.
Images of a figure similar to the devil also appear in the carvings of the Aztecs, some as many as 680 years old. In addition, the Hopi Indians believe in a malevolent force. They imagine this force not in human form, but as a fog that rises from the earth to dilute the hearts and minds of people. Like Satan, the fog is prophesied to bring about complete destruction, which the Hopi call the Day of Purification.
The Hopi had 5 worlds. We're moving from the 4th into a 5th, and they predicted it would be a time of unrest and chaos and disorder. And I think, again, if you look at the news, we're seeing that.
The Hopi doomsday prophecy gained attention in 1958 when a minister driving along an Arizona highway offered a ride to a Hopi elder. After riding in silence for several minutes, the elder shared his prophecy of a battle between good and evil that will abruptly end the current era of man.
The world world shall rock to and fro. The white man will battle against other people in other lands with those who possess the first light of wisdom. There will be many columns of smoke and fire, will cause disease and a great dying.
Some interpreters of the Hopi prophecy say the white man could refer to Western nations, and that those who possess the first light of wisdom may refer to the world's earliest civilization in Mesopotamia, now the site of Iraq. But there was more to the Hopi prophecy.
You will hear of the sea turning black, and many living things dying because of it.
They also predicted that there would be an astronomical event.
You will hear of a dwelling place in the heavens that shall fall with a great crash. It will appear as a blue star.
Now, we don't know exactly what year they were referring to. They were not that specific, but they did also say that at this time of chaos, what would follow would be the return of the Great White Brother, union, harmony, similar to the New Testament Revelation where, hell would be followed by heaven.
Both the Hopi prophecy and the Bible suggest that man's demise will be triggered by God's effort to purge the world of evil. For many, the similarities between the prophecies of Islam, the Hopi, and Christianity are more than coincidence. Some believe they are evidence that one supernatural figure of evil exists to lead the world toward a final cataclysm. A cataclysm that may take place here, in the very heart of the Holy Land. Ancient texts suggest that Satan will lead an army of evil against Jesus and God's forces on earth, and that this battle will lay waste to the world. If so, that final battle, according to biblical prophecy, may take place here, Jerusalem, Israel. For millions, it is the world's holiest city. Here, three great religions have converged: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. According to one biblical prophet, Ezekiel, Jerusalem is where a great destruction will take place. His prophecy, dated around 586 BC, is recorded in the Old Testament.
I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land.
God said throughout the Old Testament that in the last days, I will draw my people from the four corners of the earth back to the land of their forefathers, Palestine.
This roughly 40-mile wide stretch of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the River Jordan has been besieged by violence and war since the dawn of man. The United Nations established land for a state of Israel here in 1947, and the Jewish people who populate this tiny nation have struggled to survive ever since.
The Bible says that God set Jerusalem at the center of the nations and placed the rest of the nations around her. I describe Israel as the epicenter of the world, Jerusalem as the epicenter of Israel, and the Temple Mount as the epicenter of Jerusalem.
Those who accept Ezekiel's prophecy that Israel marks the site of our ultimate doom also look to another Old Testament prophet, Zechariah. In 518 BC, he recorded his prediction that Israel would regain the city of Jerusalem.
On that day, the Lord will shield those who live in Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them will be like David, and the house of David will be like God.
Israel captured East Jerusalem in 1967 in what has come to be known as the Six-Day War. Some believe this pivotal event precipitates the beginning of the end, one step closer to Satan's reign on earth. A third biblical prophecy offers yet another sign of the end times. It is from the book of Daniel, written over 2,000 years ago.
In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed.
Some Bible scholars interpret this to mean Christ would return during the time of the Roman Empire to defeat Satan. But that vast empire collapsed over 1,500 years ago. However, some say that Daniel's prophecy refers to our own time and the modern descendants of ancient Rome. They point out that in 1993, nations and kingdoms that were once part of the Roman Empire reassembled into the European Union. The EU now consists of 27 member states across the European continent.
European Union and other nations around the world are trying to pressure Israel to give up more and more land to the Palestinians, particularly in the West Bank.
Do believers see this pressure by the European Union on Israel leading to Satan's battle at Armageddon, or is it merely coincidence? According to the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus told his disciples of several more signs of end times.
For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom.
Christ said you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Think of the world today. There's rumors of wars with Iran. There's Afghanistan and Iraq. There's rumors of wars almost every day with North Korea.
We're at that place in history where there's a nuclear proliferation. No one really seems to have a good idea of how to manage this.
Believers in Satan prophecy point to the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel, who wrote that in the end days, a great military power will threaten Israel from the north.
You will come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you, a mighty army. You will come up against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land.
Some believe there is a direct link between Ezekiel's prophecy and Russia.
Just because Russia has, in fact, started to form a very dramatic military and political and economic alliance with Iran, just because Israel has been reborn as a country, Jews have poured back into the Holy Land, just because a leader of Iran is saying we will wipe Israel off the map, doesn't necessarily mean that these dramatic, apocalyptic Bible prophecies come true in our lifetime. On the other hand, the question is, can you really rule out that possibility given what is happening in our world today?
Others argue that looking for connections between prophecy and world politics is a dangerous tendency.
The problem with this tendency to identify the enemies that we feel we have at a particular moment and to identify them with the Bible is that now you have a sort of religious endorsement for your anger, for your political or social anger. And that can be a very dangerous tendency.
Some Christians suggest Satan's presence in the end times may also be seen in the most controversial book of the New Testament, Revelation. Written by John of Patmos before 70 AD, this apocalyptic vision predicts that a nation to the east of Israel will amass an enormous army.
And the 4 angels were released to kill 1/3 of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was 200 million.
What it says in the book of Revelation is that the river Euphrates will be dried up to make way for the kings of the east.
Assuming he exists, how will Satan gain such power? There are those today who worship Satan openly. But are these modern pagans really soldiers in Satan's army, leading us to annihilation? Satan, the malevolent figure Christians accept as the ultimate force of evil. Biblical texts predict he will lead the world to a violent and destructive end. To some, today's unrest is proof that the prophecies contained within these texts are being fulfilled.
he is a father of deception. And so he's behind drawing people to those things which are not the truth, which are things which are a lie. And so this is his final assault on humanity and on planet Earth.
Those convinced that Satan truly exists believe he can only challenge God by raising a massive army. Armies with troops numbering in the millions exist today, not to mention less structured guerrilla and terrorist soldiers. They would appear to be perfect candidates for Satan's army. But is this what believers think? Ancient texts suggest instead that Satan will recruit his army by corrupting mankind one soul at a time.
The Apostle Paul said that in the last days, perilous times shall come, or dangerous times. And then he listed about 15 things that all have to do with character.
In the Bible's book of Timothy, written in the 1st century AD, the disciple warns,
"For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure."
Many believe Satan to be a fallen or corrupt angel.
Satan is a very powerful angel, and angels have an intelligence and a knowledge far greater than human beings. And so Satan knows humanity in and out. He knows all of our weaknesses.
According to the Bible, Satan's seduction of humankind is just one of several ways he will gather his doomsday legions. One passage in the Gospel of Matthew indicates he will also create false messiahs and cults. 1993, Waco, Texas. The world watches as a ranch complex burns to the ground. 80 people die, 17 of them children. They called themselves the Branch Davidians, and they were led by their charismatic leader, David Koresh. Having proclaimed himself the Son of God, Koresh claimed he was the Lamb who would open the 7 seals. After a firefight with federal agents who believed he was hoarding illegal weapons, Koresh and his followers perished in a fire after a 51-day standoff. 1978, Guyana, South America. Another self-anointed Messiah, the Reverend Jim Jones, believes his commune is under attack and leads more than 900 of his followers in a mass suicide. 1969, Los Angeles, California. Charles Manson seduces his so-called family to commit a series of gruesome murders. Were these men puppets of Satan, recruiting souls for his army?
We like to personify kind of feelings and senses of what goes on in the world. Often in terms of individuals, so notorious criminals who go about, carrying out terrible acts of terrorism, kind of inhuman acts of terrorism, that we sort of struggle to understand. I think that is when we start trying to think, well, there is a kind of force for evil in the world that is bigger than any individual.
People can easily convince themselves that they're doing good while they're doing terrible things.
I'm surprised that we don't have more Jim Jones, more David Koreshes, and more Charles Mansons. I mean, we're lucky that these people are fairly rare.
Much like Christians today, fringe groups, including some satanic sects, believe in Satan's existence and that he will dominate the world as it approaches Armageddon.
In nomine Satanas, Lucifer excelsis Dei.
One of the more moderate groups is the Church of Satan, founded in 1966 with many adherents across the U.S. Their beliefs tend more toward hedonism, with carnal pleasures leading to greater self-knowledge.
Hail Satan!
Hail Satan!
The best way to explain the philosophy of the Church of Satan is probably that it's a very secular, rational philosophy based on responsible self-indulgence. Its core is certainly atheism. There's no faith in it. There's no God. It's all based on human nature and real human behavior.
But Christian believers counter that in the end of days, Satan will exact a high price from those he seduces, enslavement in his army of evil. Some also believe that those whom Satan cannot seduce, he will control by demonic possession.
In my own evaluation of cases or alleged cases of demonic possession, at some point always there is a willingness of the person to allow the evil to enter in. He or she gets lost in that darkness.
Demonic possession is real. It's one of the proofs, by the way, perhaps one of the greatest proofs for those who've experienced it, that demons are real, that the devil is real.
According to a recent study by Fordham University, exorcism is more readily available today than perhaps ever before. In 2007, Pope Benedict XVI ordered his bishops to establish teams known as exorcism squads to stop what the Catholic Church believes is Satan's rising influence.
There was a special school set up in Rome to help in the training of exorcists.
But many doubt that demonic possession is real.
There are not very many cases of legitimate exorcism going on today. Exorcisms used to be more common because we didn't know very much about human psychology and how the unconscious can trick us.
Even so, certain Christian believers accept that demonic possession is valid. And they fear that Satan continues to use it to gather his army. According to some of these believers, there are more gruesome examples of Satan on earth. They point to the rise in cases of ethnic cleansing, a euphemism for the persecution or massacre of a select population. During a 3-month period in 1994, the Hutu-led militia in Rwanda killed about 800,000 Tutsis in what has been called the Rwandan genocide. For those who believe in the existence of Satan, such shocking events seem possible only through his direction.
Satan teaches us many things. The first thing that he teaches us that he's returning. And we are to provide an army for his return.
Whenever there is evil, genocide, atrocities that are committed, violations of human rights, destruction of the environment, all of these are evil deeds. And evil, in its essence, is rooted in the teachings of Satan and those who follow his temptations.
Believers in biblical prophecy suggest that before Satan can implement his plan to wipe out mankind, he will need to enlist the help of 2 lieutenants into his army. Together, they will become an unholy trinity, and their communion will be one of the last signs that Armageddon is at hand. The most evil figure in the Bible is believed by many to be amassing an army at this very moment. His name is Satan. His plan is to fulfill the prophecy in Revelation that says he will challenge God at the end of time. But before his army can attack, signs must be revealed and events must fall like dominoes, leading to a final confrontation, a poisoned landscape, calamitous events, and the arrival of 2 monsters, the Antichrist and the false prophet, are a few of the signs that Satan's army is assembling. But is there any evidence of these prophecies coming to pass?
Is global warming the work of Satan? Is globalization the work of Satan? Is terrorism the work of Satan? That might be true. The atomic weapons, are they the work of Satan? Of course, there are all those things today, but there always have been. There always have been wars and plagues and famines. So I don't see any reason myself to suppose that any particular thing today is the work of Satan.
Certainly there have always been problems in every age, but it's an intensifying of problems. Those are the 2 key elements, greater in intensity and greater in number. And no one seems to be able to figure out what to do about it.
Further examination into the book of Revelation may provide clues on how Satan may lead mankind into Armageddon. It says Satan will bring to power two key allies, both men, the Antichrist and a false prophet. The text describes how these figures will help Satan deceive humanity and lead the world to annihilation. According to Revelation, Satan's plan begins when the Antichrist is first introduced onto the world stage.
And behold, a white horse, and its rider has a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer.
According to some biblical experts, the Antichrist, the first of the notorious four horsemen of the apocalypse, will falsely claim to bring peace.
It's going to be the peace that will destroy many. It says it will be made and confirmed by the one called Antichrist.
Labeling people the Antichrist, the whole concept smacks of somebody having an ulterior motive, and that is to demonize and caricature somebody. That being said, we can't discount altogether those voices that see it as something real.
Revelation describes how the Antichrist begins to consolidate his power.
And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation.
He is going to stir up such international problems that people will be looking for some kind of savior, some kind of messiah, somebody who will step into the scene politically, who will be able to solve the problems of the world. He'll bring war, he'll build problems, but he will bring a sense of unification.
Nostradamus, the renowned 16th century seer, also wrote of an Antichrist. In one quatrain written in 1555, Nostradamus seems to be describing the same Antichrist depicted in Revelation.
One who the infernal gods of Hannibal will cause to be reborn, terror of all mankind. Never more horror, nor the newspapers tell of worse in the past than will come to the Romans through Babel.
Babel is the ancient name for Iraq. Iraq comes up as Mesopotamia, where a crusading army goes and loses a war. Who did Hannibal worship? He worshipped the Phoenicians. Where were they worshipped? Across North Africa and what is currently the Middle East, all the way to Persia. It means Lebanon, Israel, Syria, Iraq.
To some, this suggests the Antichrist will come from the Middle East.
One who the infernal gods of Hannibal will cause to be reborn.
The Antichrist is probably here. And this man may not even know he is the Antichrist.
Christians have to consider the reality of a possible Antichrist. However, we have to keep in mind we're dealing with apocalyptic literature. What they're trying to express is a feeling, a sentiment, and they're speaking through imagery. It's analogy, it's symbol, it's metaphor.
Even so, the ancient text of Revelation suggests another puppet of Satan must appear to prepare the way for Armageddon. The Bible calls this second evil emissary the false prophet.
He gives a man who is called his false prophet the ability to do pseudo-miracles and signs and wonders so that he deceives the nations at this point.
The description bears a superficial resemblance to some modern-day preachers, but with a key difference. Revelation describes that by performing a miracle, the false prophet will trick the world into worshiping the Antichrist, whom the text also calls the beast.
And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed.
Revelation also says the false prophet will employ awesome powers.
And he performed great and miraculous signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of men.
He's able to call fire down from heaven. That's not something your everyday ordinary prophet can do. It has to be a venerated, respected religious figure that everybody would not suspect as being someone who could be a person of darkness or great evil.
According to Revelation, the false prophet will command everyone to take the mark of the beast.
He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name.
Some interpreters who understand the Bible literally believe this scenario could be played out today using current technology. Barcodes, first implemented in grocery stores in the 1970s, are now used to track a host of items, including household pets and cattle. Could this tracking technology also be applied to human beings?
Right now we have RFID technology, which could possibly tag every single person in the world to track them and to locate them wherever they are. And we also see other technologies that might come about, such as nanotechnology, that could possibly form some of these Bible prophecies as well.
But others have a different interpretation of the Bible.
What's being expressed here, I think, is more a fear of technology and probably a very good fear of the increasing power of Big Brother, rather than something that I think is a literal understanding of the book of Revelation.
Believers in the prophecy suggest that Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet will combine their powers to finally lead humanity into World War III.
The devil will have no problem finding people. He can stir up again through his spirit whole armies, and Revelation says he will.
Will Revelation's prophecy come true, dooming most of the world's population in a final battle with Satan's army? As the hour of Armageddon approaches, the last dominoes prophesying the end times will fall. According to the Bible, the unholy trinity of the false prophet, the Antichrist, and Satan will finally concentrate their power in the Holy Land as D-Day dawns for Satan's army. Biblical prophecies describe how two forces will engage in a deadly battle for the souls of humankind. One of these forces will be led by the Bible's fallen angel, Satan, the other by the Son of God, Jesus Christ. The site of the prophesied conflict? A place called Megiddo, better known as Armageddon. But the biblical text says that before this can happen, Satan must bring his chosen leaders to power.
Even now are there many antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time.
But the Antichrist is likely to start out by offering us all kinds of goodies, you know, and then once he gets us, then he's got us.
According to the book of Revelation, the conditions for battle will finally be set when Satan's chosen emissaries, the Antichrist and the false prophet, gain power in the last days of tribulation. This is when the end begins, enabling the following key events to unfold. First, the Antichrist forges a treaty that allows Israel to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Now the Antichrist, on Satan's behalf, declares himself to be God and moves into the rebuilt temple.
He takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God.
And this is what Satan always wanted, was to be exalted and made like God, or worshipped as God.
According to Revelation, the Antichrist and the false prophet will launch a reign of terror, killing all who oppose them. In response, God will challenge Satan's followers with a series of disasters, each more terrible than the last. One passage from the text describes how a falling star will cause 1/3 of all water to become poisoned.
And a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water.
Could this falling star be the same star that crashes to earth in the prophecy mentioned by a Hopi elder in the late 1950s.
You will hear of the sea turning black and many living things dying because of it.
Revelation states that the destruction will intensify with fierce storms. A massive earthquake will reduce cities and mountains to rubble. Islands will disappear, engulfed by tidal waves. The text also describes how a great hail will fall from the heavens, each stone weighing nearly 100 pounds. Is this a veiled reference to some new ice age? The final battle ensues as the world is transformed.
The judgment now is coming, and he will be the instrument of bringing it to its final climax. As he raises the nations up against God, he brings all of the nations of the earth against Jerusalem to do battle.
Some biblical scholars believe that the book of Daniel describes how great military powers will rise up against the Antichrist, attacking him from the south and the north.
The book of Daniel says, armies will surround Jerusalem.
Some biblical interpreters suggest the Antichrist will oppose the forces of good with an even larger army of 200 million that approaches from the east.
And they come across the dried up Euphrates River, and they gathered at a place called Har-Megiddo, which is north of Jerusalem.
The prophesied place is a broad valley called Armageddon. Here, according to the Bible, Jesus will make a dramatic appearance to lead the forces of good.
Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, and it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem.
The final battle between good and evil begins. This is according to John the Apostle, as he recorded in the controversial book of Revelation nearly 2,000 years ago.
And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men.
Revelation provides no details of the prophesied battle, only that Christ and his army are victorious. But some believe the Old Testament prophet Zechariah foresaw the grim aftermath.
Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth.
Christ literally dissolves them where they stand. It's a horrific picture in Zechariah 14 of what Christ will do to that great army, and the blood that will flow is quite a picture.
Revelation says the Antichrist and false prophet will be destroyed, and that Satan will be chained and imprisoned, ultimately powerless.
And then finally, at the very consummation of the age, he will be consigned to the lake of fire, which is really hell itself.
The prophecy culminates with Christ ruling on earth in peace for 1,000 years. If, according to prophecy, the end has already begun, some believe we should also look to the prophets for guidance on how to prepare for that day.
Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, taught his followers to live in this world as if you're going to live forever, but prepare for the meeting with your Lord as if you're going to die tomorrow.
In Matthew chapter 25, the message is about how we're to live our lives. It means take care of each other. It means have compassion. It means to work for peace and justice.
Prophecy makes us realize our own potential, good and bad. They force us to come to terms with which path are we going to take? Are we going to line up behind the forces of evil and destruction? Or are we going to line up behind the forces of good?
If ancient prophecy is indeed converging with recent history, and the Battle of Armageddon will soon be upon us, some may see it as an opportunity to consider how to change our ways. as that final hour approaches.